Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay. So we started yesterday. Well, again, we're on page 232. In the Mamar, in the book Lessons in Sefer Maimorim, the Mamar Beyom Ashtei Asar. So to explain better the whole concept that klipas, they get chayas from makif. Makif means like the term that's used is like someone throws something behind his back, behind his shoulder, because they're not giving it willingly. And they get their chayas, they get their sustenance, the derech agav. Derech agav means by the way, as if it's by the way. To understand that better, you begin with the mushal. The mushal is here, starts at page 230 of a king that is making a very big feast, and he's spending a lot of money on this feast. He invites all the ministers, the important ministers, and he invites the important servants. They should all come to this feast. So there are those who are not by the feast, they're not invited to the table, but nevertheless, they also work in the palace. And because this is such a big feast, a royal feast, on such a scale, so everyone benefits, even those that are not there, because there's leftovers from the meals, and even the leftovers is good food, and it's a lot of food. So those who are not invited to the meal, which are the ordinary servants and the ordinary maids, that they have ordinary simple jobs, they benefit from the leftovers. And not only humans, but even animals. There are dogs in the palace, and they also benefit because there's bones from all the meat, and they throw those bones away, and the dogs have their pleasure. Nevertheless, it's very clear that the king, when he made his plan to make this big feast, and he made his plan to spend tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for this feast, he didn't do it so that the dogs would have more bones. And he didn't do it so these ordinary maids and servants should have the leftovers. He did it mainly for the ministers and for the important servants. But now, once that it's there already, other people also benefit from it, but they're not, that's not part of the plan. That's not the goal. And the same thing is in the Nimshal. So let's start again from, we stopped in the middle, where he begins to draw a parallel between the Mashal and the Nimshal. So we'll start with page 231. There's the nimshal, similar ideas the nimshal. Shashpal the over. This is all based on the words of Rabbi Akiva, where he said, if I see that Hashem gives so much to those that violate his will, how much more so is in store for those that fulfill his will and observe his will. So this sustenance, and especially in abundance, that comes to those that violate his will, is b'derech agav. It's just by the way, and it's like someone who throws it over his shoulder. As he explains it there at length. Now let's go into the details of the mashal. He brings two examples of those that Ashpah to them is, by the way, they're not really the ones who, it wasn't meant for them, but they also benefit. Who are these people? Who are these that we're talking about? It's those that are not sitting by the king's table. Those who sing that obviously they're more important, so they get to sit by the king's table. Then there are those that are not invited to be there. Who are this? Avodim Mishvachas, the ordinary servants and the ordinary maids, and then the lower level of Klavim. And then he brings two examples. Shtei Digmois, page 232. That among those that do sit by the king's table, there's also two categories. 2 and 2. What are the two categories? Sarim Gedolim, the prominent officers, Vavadim Chshuvim, and important servants. I explained the other day that important servants means they're servants, their job is to clean the yard, their job is to clean the garbage outside, and there are servants that their job is in the palace itself. And some of them even work with the king himself. They'll bring the king his food, they'll bring the king his clothing, they'll bring the king his mail. So these are kind of things where it's a servant, but yet he's not a minister, but he's interacting with the king himself, or he's interacting with ministers. So altogether, there are 4 categories. 2 that are sitting by the table, and those 2 categories that are not by the table. Because in the Nimshal, when it comes to serving Hashem, there's also, generally speaking, 4 categories. So he starts from the bottom. The lowest level, and the dogs, they're those that they don't really serve the king himself. They're only motivated by one thing. All they want is to receive. They're not there to give. They're there to receive. To receive hashpah. Like it says, that the dogs are azei nefesh. I guess it means like the same word as chutzpah. The other saba, and they know no cessation. They never get satisfied. They always want more and more and more. I see here in the English, they say azei nefesh means they're fiercely wanting. So maybe it's from a different lashon. Maybe it's from the lashon of wanting, that they're always wanting more and more. Yes, the kasha there, Mayudua. It's known that Kelev is Meloshin Kuli Lev. The word Kelev is made up of 2 words. Kuli Lev, it's all heart. It means Teva, the Metodosai. The way Hashem created a person, their inherent nature is Shameach Shalat Lev. We have a heart and we have a brain, and the Eibusha created us in a way that the brain rules over the heart. This person would be described spiritually like a kelev, is in the exact opposite from the way it should be, which is it's supposed to be the brain rules over the heart. So what's not the right way is that the heart rules over the brain. But this is even more than that. Shukulilev, it's all heart. Like as if there is no brain altogether, there's no intellect at all, just emotion. That means this is describing a person that his entire concern, his goal in life is just to fulfill the desires and the pleasures of his heart. That's what life is all about to him. So therefore, this is a person who doesn't really follow Torah mitzvahs. This person who violates Torah mitzvahs because he does whatever is pleasurable, whether Hashem agrees or not. He just does it. Above that are those that are described as servants. We say the word servants mean they do serve Hashem. They do serve Hashem, but they're simple servants of a lower caliber. Why is it a lower caliber? This is alluding to people that they serve the king, which is Hashem, but they do it because they're forced to do it. What does it mean, forced? Just like Begashmias, servants usually were, these kind of servants were really lower class people. And the only thing that got them to do what they needed to do was they were whipped or they had to be disciplined. So it means there's a person who serves Hashem because he's afraid of punishment. So on one hand, he's serving Hashem, he's learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, he's refraining from doing an Aveira, but the motivation not because he's connected to the Melech or he loves Hashem. He's doing it mainly because he's afraid of getting punished. Yep.
The person in the category of Caleb, he doesn't serve Hashem at all, or he serves himself.
That's what it means. I think that's what it means. It's a person who is not even this person who serves Hashem, but because he's afraid of punishment. So apparently, the lower level not even afraid of punishment, just does what he wants. Which means whatever they're doing, these servants, is contrary to their own will and their own pleasure. The Avda, page 234. What's their own pleasure? The Gemara says, Avda befkera nichale. A servant enjoys living without any restraints. Again, we don't have such thing as slaves and these kind of people today. But in those days, when he talks about these simple servants, it means people that are very low class, and all they want is to live a life without restraint. And therefore, when they do follow what the king wants, because they're afraid of punishment, what does it mean? That in essence, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this mitzvah. In essence, I don't want to hold back from doing this Aveira. But I have no choice, because if I don't follow the rules, I'll get hurt. So it means even while they're doing the Torah and the mitzvahs, it's really contrary to their real will and pleasure. But they're just forcing themselves to do it because they're afraid. This explains why this category is also not sitting by the king's table. It means that true desire, the true pleasure is just worldly thing, is gashmis, just like the lower level. The only difference is the lower level, the pleasure for gashmi is so strong that they don't even make an effort to do what Hashem wants. They do. But the fact that they don't violate Hashem's will is not because they care about doing what Hashem wants, but they care about themselves, like Yiras Einish. That's why that's why in the mashal, where's their place? Not by the king's table. They're outside of the king's table because they're really not there to serve the king. So these are the two lower categories. Now we come to the two higher categories. Ashek and Avodah Machshuvim. What does it mean when it says there are servants that are more important servants? In the mashal, like I said, it means their function is a more important function. They're interacting with ministers, they're interacting with the king, they're interacting with important people in the palace. This Baruch Nisid means Avedasam es hamelech beratzim echeshek. They serve the king with pleasure. They enjoy, they recognize who the king is, and they're not doing it because they're afraid of punishment. They're serving the king because they enjoy that. That's what they want. That's their desire. But they're still called avodim. Why? They're not ministers. Their main avodah, which means what's primarily motivating them, is Kabbalah's oil. What's Kabbalah's oil? Kabbalah Soil means accepting the king's yoke. I recognize he's the king, and therefore I have to be loyal to the king, to submit myself to the king. But it's not about punishment. It's about realizing that this is the emes, this is the person, this is the one who rules the world. So I should be submitting myself to him. Kabbalah Soil, even though they don't really understand so much the greatness of the king, but they just follow because they know this is the right thing to do. It's known in Chassidus. It explains the difference between a son and a king. This is based on the fact that in many places in the Chumash and also in davening, we refer to Hashem as our father, right? And some places we refer to Hashem as our king. Some places we refer to ourselves as Hashem's children, and sometimes we refer to ourselves as Hashem's servants. So, for example, the famous Tefillah, Avinu Malkeinu, that's what we're saying. Avinu, Hashem, you're our father, and we're your children. Malkeinu, you're our king, and we're your servant. So obviously, it means that there are two ways of serving Hashem. Whenever you find that there's different descriptions, like of Yidden, that means each description is describing a different aspect of our relationship with Hashem. What is the difference between a ben and an eved? Zeh shehaben eiser ratzon aviv, the son who does the will of his father, because he loves his father. It's a natural thing that a child loves his father, so therefore he does what the father wants. When a servant carries out the will of his master, it's b'derech kabbalah soil. It's not so much because of love; it's more dedication, loyalty, and he knows that he has to do what the king wants. Even though we call it kabbalah soil, they're gufa beratzon v'cheshik, but that is with a will, with a desire. So it's not that someone's forcing him. They want to be the Kabbalah upon themselves, El Melech Shemayim, Hashem, the kingdom of heaven. That's why they're places by the king's table. This reminds me of the story of a chassid that was traveling with someone. I don't remember what the circumstances were, why it was that way, but I think he was traveling with somebody who was part of the military in Russia, and they were passing a fort, and they saw that they were disciplining a certain soldier, flogging the soldier. So he asked them, what happened? What did he do that he deserves this? So he said it was one night that he was supposed to be watching the fort, and they found him that he wasn't moving around. He was supposed to go from this place to that place. Why not? Because his feet froze from the cold. He says, really? That's why they flogged him? So, or maybe I make a mistake. I think maybe he heard it while they were beating him. They said to him, if you would have remembered the oath that you gave to the king when you became a soldier, that you're going to serve him loyally, that should have warmed you up that your feet wouldn't freeze. I don't know if they did it because they loved the king so much, but basically he learned from this Ahiron Avedis Hashem that even Kabbalah's oil, when a person serves Hashem with Kabbalah's oil, doesn't mean that I'm just doing it because I'm being forced. It means I don't understand to the extent that my heart is on fire with love for Hashem. That I don't have, but I do have I want to be connected to Hashem. It's a commitment, the dedication, the loyalty to Hashem I have.
Okay, so would his feet be warmed up if he had that second thing, the commitment, the desire to be?
Right. And we're bringing out that even though this is called Kabbalah is accepting the yoke. What does it mean, accepting the yoke? Accepting the yoke means it's not necessarily something that I understand intellectually that the king asked to do something or wants me to not to do something, that I understand what's behind it. I just know he's the king and I want to follow him and I want to be connected to him. So the same with Hashem. We don't know. There are people that understand much more depth to Torah, to mitzvahs, what we're doing, why we're doing, what we're accomplishing. And they are on fire when they do mitzvahs because of their understanding. So they really love the Torah and mitzvahs, and because they love Hashem. There's certain people, they don't have that understanding of Hashem to stimulate that love for Hashem. But what they do have is commitment. They're committing themselves because they know Hashem is the king, and therefore I have to be committed. But that commitment is with desire, it's not against their will.
So that commitment would be enough in the muscle to make his feet not freeze.
I think that's I'm using that's my muscle, but
Okay, thank you.
I want to bring out the idea that even when we're dealing with just loyalty and commitment, it still is in a way that it's something that that permeates the desire of the person. It's not just a technical act. I mean, really, another example sometimes brought is where Yidden, in fact, this is, as some of you might remember, I spoke about it in the dorm, that Yidden are compared to soldiers. And soldiers are also the same thing. When a soldier gets a command from his commander, and the soldier would say, "Why do you think we should do that?" He would also be, disciplined or sent out. I mean, the soldier is supposed to say, "Yes, that's all. Just tell me where to go, and when to go, and I'm ready to go." And not only that, but the commander also has a commander, and he has to follow what his commander. He doesn't ask any questions. That's Kabbalah Servant. It doesn't necessarily mean that I understand. I'm just accepting the yoke of this authority. Just yesterday in the Rambam, we were learning about this subject, about war and going out to war, and now we have to do it because that's what Hashem wants us to do. And people go out to war, they have to forget about all the things that might make them feel fear and anxiety, and have to go in it with complete confidence. So it's basically I have to do what I have to do. I think I mentioned that time that the Pretty Rebbe once said, if that's the case, then why does a soldier have a head altogether? If he's not supposed to be thinking, just following orders, speaking in a figurative way. And he said the reason why he has a head is because the strap of his rifle has to hang on something, so he has a head. But really, it's not to ask questions, and not that he has to understand. So what is the difference between a servant and a soldier? There is a difference. Because each one, like I had before, each description to emphasize a different aspect. The soldier is all about loyalty and commitment, and the servant is all about loyalty and commitment. But a soldier is something more and something additional, and that's Mesiras Nefesh. Soldiers are ready to give up their lives. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, a lot of our heads were in the lives of soldiers and in their minds, and we heard and saw what they did. People who gave up their life, which the stories are just incredible stories. But it's all about them, people that they ready to do these kind of things. So that's a soldier. Servant doesn't necessarily emphasize Mesiras Nefesh, but a soldier is Mesiras Nefesh. But we also have to remember that today, Baruch Hashem, we don't have to do Mesiras Nefesh. It's not called for. Mesiras Nefesh for us today is giving up something that we want very much, and I'm giving it up for Hashem. That's Mesiras Nefesh. Must have mentioned this before, that the oldest, there's very few today from that generation, but when I was growing up, there were older Chassidim who came from Russia. And in Russia, almost everyone you knew was either almost arrested or actually arrested. They were teaching children underground cellars, and a lot of them got arrested and went out of jail. You see them walking around here like everybody else, but really they went through crazy experiences. So the Chassidim of the Frierdiker Rebbe were asked to put their life on the line, which is basically spread Yiddishkeit underground. But if they were caught, they were sent to Siberia. Look, the Rebbe's father, that's what it was all about. Rachmana litzlan. So a few times a year, the Rebbe asked everyone to walk to other neighborhoods on Yantif and bring simcha. It's called ta'alucha. Ta'alucha means a march. We're marching from here to other neighborhoods. And it's almost inevitable. Whenever there's a talucha, it rains. And sometimes we have this chuz that it's a torrential rain. But it's always raining weather. So the older Hasidim would laugh and say, now you're watching the Americana, they used to call it Americana chocoladnikas, going on with serious nefesh. They're going to walk in the rain. Americans who are raised on chocolate bars, they're going to walk in the rain. So there are different levels of, but you know what? For some people, that's Mesiras Nefesh. They're going to walk in the rain. They're going to get wet. It's very uncomfortable. And Hashem should help. That should be our only kind of Mesiras Nefesh. And for some people, it's withholding from eating something, doing a certain mitzvah. I remember once, this is years ago, when I was in Minnesota, so it must have been in the 1980s. There was a woman there that told me that she took on to keep kashrus. She lived in Texas somewhere. So this is way before they had shluchim all over the place. And she said, you know what it means for me to keep kosher? It doesn't just mean to keep kosher. Said, I'm married 15 years. I never ate supper at home. We eat out every night. Now it's a whole different way of life. That means there's no place to eat out. So I have to make supper in the house. It's like for a person like that, this is Mesiras Nefesh. So yes, Kabbalah Soil means any kind of thing where I feel I have to give up what I want, but I'm doing it willingly. I'm doing it because this is what Hashem wants, and I'm committed to Hashem. But it's not with the love like those people who really understand the greatness of Hashem, and therefore they have this love for Hashem. But because they're serving Hashem with desire, they're also sitting by the king's table. So that's the servants. So what's the next level, which are the ministers? Above that, the next level is the Sarim, the ministers. A minister means someone that knows how a kingdom is supposed to run. These are people who have knowledge and understanding in things that are sort of related to the king. And that's why Kama V'Kama and Yonim, so many matters of the kingdom, it goes according to their authority. They're the ones who make the decisions how things should be running in the kingdom. So that's why ministers are people who they have an understanding in how the king wants the country to run. So they understand how the king wants the country to run. Number two, they recognize the virtues of the king. Again, we're talking about a king in the purest way. We're living in a generation where the word king has a very, very negative connotation. And for most of the world, is a democracy we put away with kings. And the reason was because they were corrupt and they used their power and their authority in a corrupt way to do things which were unethical and do things which were immoral, and everything was with force and power. But kingdom and a king in its own right, we learned this before, in the beginning of the Maimer, was really a person who was exceptional intellectually, emotionally, in his midas, like David HaMelech, and Shlomo HaMelech, and Moshe Rabbeinu, and Shmuel HaNavi. He wasn't actually a king, but he was a leader. All the leaders of Israel, the tzaddikim, were thinking of the Rebbe. What does it mean? This is a person that people love because of his greatness, because of who he is. So these are the ministers. They understand the greatness of the king, and therefore they have this love for the king. So when they serve the king, it's not only because they're accepting the yoke of the king, because they actually love the king, and that's why they do it. Being that he used the term Sarim Gedolim, the big officers, that seems to imply that even within officers, there are two levels. There are the big officers and the ordinary officers. The Sarim Gufa, page 236. Yeshnam kama v'kama dargas. There are many levels in the officers, but generally speaking, neflokas, they're divided into two levels: sarim stam, ordinary officers, and prominent officers. So that means that altogether we have three categories that are sitting by the king's table. One is the servants that are loyal, one is the ordinary officers, and the third is the prominent officers, the exceptional officers, that they have a higher level of serving. So what does it mean in the mashal, in the nimshal? It doesn't explain it, but it probably would mean that they have a higher level of love for Hashem. Because we know in Chassidus, there are many different levels of love. So therefore, even those that understand Hashem, have love for Hashem, there's definitely levels of what level of love there is. And sometimes we find that was divided into general levels. Bitlayesh, Mitzias, different terms that are used. But he's not going into that now. Just saying it's a higher level of love for Hashem. So they're called the prominent officers, the important officers. So these three levels that are sitting by the king's table, now we understand it's Behessen. This corresponds to the three categories that are mentioned in the Medrash. That when the king came, he came with Duksin, Iparchen, and Isratalutin. Three different kinds of ministers. Remember the marshal in the beginning. Some people said, I'm choosing this minister. Some people said, we're choosing this one. Some people said, I'm choosing this one. So the fact that it mentions three categories is the dugmas about the machshuvim. This is similar to the important servants and the ministers are sitting by the king's table. So now we see the parallel drawn between the mashal and the nimshal. So when it says that there are those people that choose these people, and then there's a chacham that says, I'm not choosing this minister, I'm not choosing that minister, I'm not choosing... These are people who are very close to the king. So we understand why they'd want to have a relationship with them, why they would choose them. But nevertheless, they say, I'm not choosing them, I'm going to choose the king himself. Now he's going to explain what does it mean spiritually. Obviously, before we were talking about negating people who worship the stars, the moon, the constellations. Now we're explaining on a deeper level. These are not things that are klipa, not things that are distant from Hashem. These are actually levels of those that are considered sitting by the table with Hashem, so to speak. And nevertheless, that's not what I'm connecting to. I want to connect to Hashem himself. So what are these three levels that, in spite of the fact that they're so much connected to the king, nevertheless, I don't choose them, I choose the king himself. This is where it starts getting a little bit harder to follow, but
Okay.
Hold on tight. Yeah.
To clarify that point, so in the marshal, choosing the king himself, I understand, but the other option, the lower option would be choosing the higher or ministers, like someone above.
Right.
Okay.
In other words, before we said the other option would be choosing the sun, the stars, the constellations, something which is klipa.
Right.
Now we're saying the other option would be choosing something in kedusha, but yet it would be compared to a minister's and not to the king himself. What is that? Yeah, we don't have much time to really learn this properly, but we'll start. Maybe Rabbi Duba will start from this part. I'll start what we're up to. But let me just at least bring it in. Based on this, we can say, Hagam Shakavana Bepashtos. When you read the Medrash, the literal meaning of the Medrash, where it says there were three different ministers, and he didn't choose the ministers, generally speaking, we understand it to mean the seven ministering angels of Klipas Noga. In other words, when we say that the nations of the world, they get sustenance they choose something else, it means Hashem created 70 angels, and these angels, they give sustenance to all the 70 nations. But these angels are angels that are klipas noga. They're not angels of kedusha. They're angels of klipas noga. And in other words, they're not total klipa because these are angels, but nevertheless they have in them klipa, and that's where the rest of the world gets their sustenance from. But now that we're saying that the three categories are sitting by the king's table, that means we're talking about something even higher than those angels. In other words, not only they don't choose the sun, the moon, the constellations. Don't forget in the beginning of the Maimer, when he said that people think that if they worship the sun, the moon, and constellations, they'll get more. That's absolutely foolish. The sun can't do anything. The moon and the constellations have no independent power. So the answer is they're thinking about the angels that are in charge of the sun and the moon and constellations. And they do have intellect and they do have understanding. So they think that they have independent power because it appears that way, but really they don't. Nevertheless, page 237. This is to allude to the fact that we're not talking about the 70 ministering angels, which are klipas noga. Now, why are they klipas noga of their angel? The answer is because they're also yesh v'daber fnei atzmei. These are really angels, but these angels do feel a little bit of that independence of Hashem. They have that feeling of yeshus. And being that they feel the independence of Hashem, therefore, these angels are considered klipas noga. So they're more compared to the avadim abchusim. They would be compared to those servants that are outside of the king's table. And therefore, when it talks about those that are by the king's table, must be angels or spiritual things that are on a higher level of kedusha. And even though it's kedusha, that's not what I'm choosing. What could that be? So we'll be stopping over here, and hopefully I'm leaving in the hard part of the mind. Okay. Stop here. Could be he'll finish the mimer, then we'll start another mimer after that. I'll prepare a mimer, and we're going to start the mimer from the Frierdiker Rebbe. But I hope I'll be out for not too long, maybe a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks, hopefully the most 2 weeks. Okay. Welcome up, everybody. It's you don't say Tachlan today because it's Chamishas about the Shvat. It's Rosh Hashanah for the trees, and we also will have a Sima Rambam this afternoon, as you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, tables move around here.
But there is a table.
Well, yeah.
Is it longer than
Especially because I gave mine away. My daughter, so now,
Oh, you had a con?
I had one, and then I gave it to my daughter, so now I
Okay, good.
have to pay back for giving one to my daughter.
Wait, you just want to-
No, I didn't have this one. This was pretty. No, I didn't know anything until 2 days ago.
So,
You probably do both with that.
oh, okay, so just that last concept I asked to clarify, you did, but I'm still confused.
Which concept?
So. The idea of the higher ministers,
Yeah.
they're serving, you're That they're not the highest level because rather than serve the king themselves, they're serving the next higher minister.
No, that's not what I got from that. I got, wait, hold on. As in the prominent and prestigious, like the ordinary officers versus like the prominent officers.
Yeah.
I thought that they were serving Hashem out of love, like they accompany the king. And they automatically like have the yoke of Hashem on them.
But how is it different from one level of hierarchy?
I don't fully understand that yet either. I mean, they're all about like the 3 levels of officers, I would assume are the same in like concept, because they all have, like, they all do the same type of job.
The way I thought he was saying, it was seems to clarifying, he said yes, but then I was like, really, did I say that? Was that almost like, I'm gonna make my own marshal,
Right.
you're serving, let's say do you really care about prime minister of a country, really care about that country,
Yeah,
but then you meet his first assistant,
yeah.
and it's like, you're serving him, because he's.
I see, the analogy is like making it sound a little confusing. Yeah, because we're using like, I guess like Gaussian terms, so it's making it a little bit harder to understand. Hold on, I just wanna read it and see what it
Yeah, I was
says.
trying to read it too.
It goes straight into Klippas Noga. It doesn't really give any further explanation right now. Wait, hold on. Nevertheless, the fact that the Midrash describes the Duke et al. As accompanying the king alludes to the concept that the analog refers not only to the 70 patron angels, who are characterized by Yeshus and possess an independent identity. Accordingly, it is explained